Thank you all so much for being here. I will try to talk loudly so you can hear me and briefly so you can get back to drinking beer. But thanks for spending the time. I want to just talk a little bit about the ballot initiative and a little bit about why it's so important and why we hope to have your help. I think that many of you have probably followed the work over the last couple of years in terms of education in Colorado, and many of you are probably familiar with some of the landscape of where we are right now, which is, you know that a lot has changed in the last 20 years since we last wrote the School Finance Act. So literally, you know, most of you were in grade school was one function, but we came from a state that the last time we wrote our School Finance Act, we did not have, no one in this room had a cell phone, had access to the internet, or an email address. And so when you think about the way the world has changed in those 20 years, what hasn't changed is the way that we fund schools. This state has changed dramatically. You think about how this state right now has doubled the number of kids who live in poverty from the last time we wrote the School Finance Act. 1994 was about 22% of kids, now it's a little more than 40% of kids. And so we've seen an explosion of students in this state who are now learning English for the first time. That was 5,000 or 10,000 students 20 years ago, it's now 110,000 students. And so what we've seen is a dramatically changing face of the state, and we haven't built an actual school finance formula that's able to keep up with that. And so what we've endeavored to do here is try to build a system that will make Colorado the envy of the country and the envy of the world. What will it take to make Colorado first in the world again in terms of outcomes? What we know is that Colorado does not share that distinction right now. Colorado shares some rather dubious distinctions, like the one that I come back to is if you wanted to know where the worst state in the country was, if you were a 10 or 12 or 13-year-old black or brown kid in the state who wanted to go to college. I started my career teaching in Mississippi, and so I would come home and folks would say, man, what's it like to teach in a state as horrible as Mississippi? And the amazing fact is, if you wanted to know the worst college achievement gap in the country, it's not Mississippi. It's not Alabama, it's not Tennessee, it's not Georgia. It's actually the state where you're standing right now, it's Colorado. And so when you look about the work that we have to do, there is dramatic work left to be done. And so what we've tried to do is say, what would it take to actually build a school finance system that fundamentally breaks the link between poverty and performance? It fundamentally says the role of public education is to actually be the great equalizer, to say, yes, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, and the single largest public investment we make, which is K-12 education, is that chance to build citizens and young people who have the power to control their own dreams. We know our system doesn't do that dramatically. So what we're hoping to do are a handful of really big ideas that will provide dramatic change. We're going to make a dramatic investment in the places that we know make the biggest difference for kids. Things like early childhood education. We'll finally, for the first time, make sure every kindergartner in the state has access to full-day kindergarten, that every 3- and 4-year-old who needs access to early childhood education would have access to that, that students in districts in low-performing schools who need more time will have the opportunity to do extended school years or school days, and that will be the first state to make an across-the-board investment to say, we believe, most importantly, these dollars need to go to schools and to classrooms. We'll be the first state to actually require by law that dollars follow kids, not just to school districts or to central offices, but to the actual schools where they attend. And that if those kids leave those schools, those dollars travel with them. So we don't have the age-old problem we've had now, which is if you are a poor family that's highly mobile and your mom loses her job in Aurora in December and you got to move to Arvada or to Westminster, right now when you show up at that new school, you show up in December 3 months behind and not a single dollar comes in the door with you. Which means you take our kids who need the greatest amount of support, they come in behind the 8 ball without the resources they need to be successful. So now we're saying is let's put a priority on our kids who need the most support and make sure that they have the dollars they need to reach success. And finally, we'll say let's build a system that matches Colorado values, which is let's back up smart ideas with smart investments. Let's actually say that, in Jennifer's words, let's say that if we're going to make investments that make a difference, let's make sure they actually bring a return on investment, which is we'll be the first state to actually know exactly where every taxpayer dollar goes and exactly what the results on those investments are. So if we find out that our extended school days and school years are generating great results, it allows us to do a lot more of that. If we find out that our investments into early childhood education and kindergarten are getting great results, it allows us to do a lot more of that. And finally, we're going to try and fundamentally solve this deep ingrained problem of equity that our system has faulted on. Right now what you have is systems across the state where the people in the districts with the highest rates of poverty are right now paying the highest tax rates to get the least amount of dollars into their schools and get the least amount of state support. Coupled with districts with the highest assessed valuations are paying the lowest tax rates, getting the most state investment, and then having a great deal of state dollars put on top of that. So what we want to try to fundamentally do is say the job as a state is to make sure that all kids get the resources they need regardless of their needs. That we create a system that's both fair and transparent and achieves excellent outcomes for all kids. So that's the goal. Why does it matter? And why do we hope that you'll be able to spend some time over the next 125 days to help us pass this? The story I think of about this is Dr. King has been a hero of mine for a long time, and so one of my favorite talks is the speech that he gave in Memphis the night before he was assassinated. And the most compelling part of that speech for me is he comes out in Memphis and it's late at night, it's been raining, he's not feeling well, and he gives this amazing speech about the mountaintop, right? You know the speech about I've been to the mountaintop, I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. And I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. But in the middle of that speech, he tells a remarkable story. And he tells the story of the Good Samaritan, right? You all know the parable of the Good Samaritan. And he talks about how he actually went back to Jericho and he walked this road himself. And he says, I now understand the Good Samaritan parable much more because the road to Jericho is actually a deeply dangerous road. It's sort of like the drive up Independence Pass. It's like windy roads, huge cliffs, you think you're going to fall off the whole time. And so he says, I understand why when the priest and the Levite were riding along the road to Jericho and they saw this man who'd fallen down in the street, they were scared. Because they asked themselves this question. They said, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? Which is a fair question, because it's possible that they get mugged, or it's a setup, or they get robbed, or they get killed, or they're just late for their next meeting. Right? Those are all truths. But King says the power of the Good Samaritan is the Good Samaritan changes the question. The Good Samaritan asks the question, if I don't stop to help this man, what will happen to him? And so I'd pose the same question to you, which is you all have very busy lives helping build your own careers right now. And so if you stop to help this effort, what will happen to you? Yes, you'll give up a couple of Saturdays that you might have been out in the mountains biking or out at a bar enjoying your friends. You might get into a couple of hard conversations with friends over beers or at your work or at a bar on a Friday night where it turns out they don't agree with the values you agree with, and you're going to find yourself in that hard moment. But I think that in this moment, that also is the wrong question. The question in this moment is if you don't stop to help our kids, what will happen to them? What will happen to them is we will continue to be a state in which demography still drives destiny, in which you can still bet the likelihood of a kid in this state going to college based on what zip code he lives in, how much money his parents make, and yes, in 2013 by the color of his skin. Those three variables are still true right now in Colorado in 2013. None of us want to be a part of a state that is characterized by that truth, but all of us want to be a part of the first state that says we were the ones that fundamentally broke this cycle of intergenerational poverty. And we did it by saying it's possible to actually build a world-class system for every kid by making investments that make the biggest difference and providing transparency and accountability that we know drive real results. So I think this is truly a once-in-a-generation chance. I don't know that we'll travel this way again. And I don't know if we fail at this, what the next 4 to 6 years look like. Because if we can't solve our problems in K-12 education, we can't solve our problems in transportation and in infrastructure and in economic development and in healthcare. Right? This is the single largest part of the state budget that drives the single greatest need. And you can't attract and keep businesses if you can't train workers that they want to hire. So I think all of the work, whatever your individual passion is, starts here. And for us to build a state we're going to be proud of, we have to all stop at this question and say, at the moment when we're asked, if we stop to help this man, what will happen to us? We have to change the question. And say, if we don't step up to help right now, what will happen to the million kids in the state who can't vote, but who depend on us to vote the right way? So I'm going to ask you to make as much of a commitment as you can in time and effort and passion over the next 120 days. I want to thank the students who are here tonight from SFR who are actually already gathering signatures. So if you haven't signed yet, they'll make sure and sign you up. We have ballots in the back. But we're going to do 5 days with all of our fellows. We'll be out walking. There'll probably be some happy hours afterwards, and so if you want to walk and work hard and maybe enjoy a fine adult beverage at the end of the day, we'd love to have you to come join us too. It'll be good fun. So I want to thank you so much for all the work you've done to date, and thank you in advance for putting your shoulder to the wheel on this challenge for the next 120 days, because I think there is no question bigger than the state faces right now. So thank you so much for having me.
I just want to say really fast, we can have some questions in a minute. Thanks to Mike Johnston for being here. We know you have a lot on your plate. I know this is important. Also, this is a slight change of topic, but can we just get a hand for the news today out of the U.S. Supreme Court?
My phone's been dead for 3 hours, so I have exciting news to go back to when I read that.
There's a lot of reading to catch up on.
Yes.
It's a big step. Ultimately, I think it probably says a lot less about the opinions of a handful of unelected officials and a lot more about the good groundwork that's been going on in places like Denver and across the state for decades now, frankly. So that's really important. I appreciate all the work that the fellows are doing. If anybody's been paying attention, this year, more than ever, DYD has been working on getting involved, getting good work done, and really living our values in our communities. Don't let anybody tell you this is an off year. All you fellows definitely know there's something on the ballot to watch out for. We've been out doing service projects in our neighborhoods, and all this stuff the senator was just talking about, all the things that he and his staff and his colleagues have been working so hard on.
She loves you also. She's fully supportive of DYD.
We're going to do everything we can to help them out on this measure, so that not just that it gets on the ballot and that it gets the votes it needs to actually become law in this state, but so that our students and our teachers have the resources they need to give the state the future it deserves. So thanks for being here. If anybody has any questions for the senator, Aaron?